It was 11:47 at night when my phone lit up on the kitchen island. I did not answer. I simply watched the notification dissolve into a voicemail icon. My apartment in Chicago was silent. A hermetically sealed glass box floating 40 stories above the street. I pressed play. My mother's voice did not ask how I was. She did not ask if I was sitting down. She just delivered the schedule. We have booked your pre-op for Tuesday. Dr. Evans needs to check your liver enzymes before the transplant. We need to make sure you are ready for Matthew. There was no question mark at the end of that sentence. It was not a request. It was a requisition order. My body was not mine anymore. It was inventory. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from. Have you ever felt like your decisions were not truly yours? I want to hear your story. Hysteria is a structural flaw I could not afford. I placed the phone on the cold marble, analyzing the silence. For 28 years, I had trained for this moment. I just did not know it. In architecture, there is a concept called a load-bearing wall. It is the element that holds up the weight of the roof, the snow, the rain, and the floors above. It is never the wall that gets the expensive wallpaper or the gallery lighting. It is thick, silent, and invisible. If you remove it, the house collapses. I was not the daughter. I was the load-bearing wall for a family that was structurally unsound. For years, people asked me why I stayed. Why did I answer the calls? Why did I visit on holidays? They did not understand the invisible tether of the survivor. It is a psychological condition, a learned helplessness that functions like a glass barrier. You can see the door, you can see the freedom on the other side, but after years of hitting the glass, every time you try to move, you stop trying. You convince yourself the barrier is real, even when it is not. My parents had installed that glass when I was 4 years old. They taught me that my value was not intrinsic. It was conditional. My rent for existing in their world was my utility. I was the spare part kept on the shelf, dusted off only when the main engine, my brother Matthew, began to sputter. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I saw the meticulous armor I had built. My life in Chicago was precise, minimalist furniture, white surfaces, everything controlled. I became an architect because I needed to understand how to build spaces that no one could enter without a key. I needed to build walls that did not bow under pressure. But tonight, looking at the city lights, the memories of the disparity flooded back, not as emotions, but as line items on a balance sheet I had ignored for too long. I remembered the year I qualified for the state robotics championship. It was the same weekend Matthew ran a low-grade fever. My parents did not even discuss it. We stayed home. I spent the weekend fetching ice chips and reading textbooks while my robot gathered dust in the garage. I remembered the finances. When Matthew turned 16, my father drove a brand new sedan into the driveway with a red bow on the hood. When I graduated summa cum laude from university, paying my own way by selling plasma and working the night shift at a library, my mother handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $120. She told me to buy something nice. I did not cash it. I framed it, I hung it in my closet behind my coats, a private reminder of my market value in their economy. Matthew was the sun, burning bright and consuming everything in his orbit to stay alive. I was the shadow, cool and quiet, expected to disappear until I was needed to eclipse the danger. But the voicemail playing on a loop in my head changed the equation. They were not asking for money anymore. They were not asking for time. They were coming for my blood. They were coming for my liver. The invisible tether that had held me in place for nearly 3 decades did not stretch. It snapped. The voicemail notification faded from the screen, leaving only my reflection in the black glass. There was no need to replay it. I executed the protocol. I opened my banking app, transfer funds. Confirm. The savings account I had been building since I was 22, the escape fund disguised as a retirement plan, was emptied. Next, I logged into my brokerage account. Sell all assets. Confirm. Liquidate. The numbers on the screen dissolved into cash, untraceable, and mobile. I was not just moving money, I was severing the financial veins they thought they could tap whenever they needed a transfusion. I pulled my suitcase from the closet. The sound of the zipper opening was loud in the quiet apartment. I packed with military precision. No sentimental items, no photo albums, no gifts from holidays past. Just clothes, my laptop, my sketchbooks, and my drafting tools. The sensory details of that hour are burned into my memory. The sticky sound of packing tape sealing the boxes I would leave behind, the smell of dust as I cleared the shelves. The cold, smooth feel of the keycard I left on the counter. I drafted a resignation email to my firm, effective immediately due to urgent personal relocation. Send. I did not file a change of address with the post office. I did not tell my friends. I simply walked out of the glass tower and into a taxi. O'Hare Airport, I said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My father this time. Then Matthew. I took the SIM card out and snapped it in half. The plastic crunched, a satisfying, final sound. I dropped the pieces into a trash can outside the terminal. I bought a burner phone at a kiosk and booked a one-way ticket to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I chose Santa Fe for the light. In Chicago, the light is filtered through glass and steel, gray and diluted. In the desert, the light is raw. It exposes everything. I needed a place where there were no shadows to hide in. I needed horizontal lines, earth tones, and silence. I landed in the high desert just as the sun was setting, painting the Sangre de Cristo mountains in shades of blood and fire. The air smelled of piñon, smoke, and sage. It was the opposite of the sterile, refrigerated air of my old life. I rented a small adobe casita on the edge of town. Thick mud walls, heavy wooden beams, imperfect and solid. I filed the paperwork for a legal name change the next morning. Samantha became something else on paper, something unburdened. I was no longer the spare part. I was a sovereign entity. For the first time in my life, my body belonged only to me. But silence is heavy. In the quiet of the desert night, without the constant noise of their demands, I realized just how loud the silence could be. I had escaped the immediate threat, but I knew the war was just beginning. They would not let their inventory walk away without a fight. I settled into the rhythm of Santa Fe. I bought furniture made of reclaimed wood. I adopted a dog, a scruffy terrier mix I named Scout, who slept at the foot of my bed and barked at the coyotes. I met Alexander at a coffee shop. He was reading a medical journal, and his hands were steady. He was a trauma surgeon. He understood the sanctity of the body. He understood that cutting someone open was an act of violence that required consent. When I told him my story, he did not tell me I was cruel. He did not tell me to forgive. He looked at my hands and said, "You saved your own life. That is the most important surgery you will ever perform." But the silence from Chicago did not last. It shattered 3 months later. My mother found me online. Not directly. I had scrubbed my digital footprint, but through the digital exhaust we all leave behind. A tagged photo from a local art gallery opening. A mention on an architectural forum. She created fake accounts. First, it was just comments. "You are killing your brother. We know you are in the Southwest. Selfish. Murderer." I blocked them. I reported them. But like a hydra, for every head I cut off, 2 more appeared. They started calling my old office in Chicago, harassing my former colleagues for information. They hired a cyber investigator. I sat in my living room, the desert sun streaming through the windows, and I pulled out my laptop. I did not engage. I did not argue. I opened a spreadsheet. It was time to look at the receipts. I had kept everything, every financial transaction, every gift, every disparity. I looked at the numbers. The graduation gift, $120. The car Matthew received for his 16th birthday, $28,000. The plasma donation receipts, $60 each, twice a week for 4 years, to pay for textbooks. The total cost of the private investigator they had hired to stalk me, $6,000 more than they had spent on my entire childhood education. I printed them out. I taped them to the wall of my office. It was a map of my devaluation. It was not love. It was an investment portfolio where I was the bad asset and Matthew was the venture capital. Alexander came over that evening. He saw the wall. He traced the lines of the receipts with his finger. "This isn't just favoritism," he said, his voice low. "This is a loss of control. They need you to be the victim. If you are not the victim, they are not the martyrs. They are just abusers." He was right. Their stalking was not about saving Matthew. It was about reestablishing the hierarchy. They needed their spare part back on the shelf. They needed me to be small so they could feel big. I looked at the wall, at the mathematical proof of my erasure, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. I was done running. I was done hiding. I was going to make sure they understood that the Bank of Samantha was closed permanently. One Tuesday morning, the silence of the desert was broken by the sound of a car engine. A black sedan pulled up the long gravel driveway. I watched from the window. A man got out. He wore a suit that was too hot for Santa Fe. He carried a leather folder. I knew what he was before he even knocked. He was a private investigator. My parents had spent $6,000 to find me. That was the price tag on my autonomy. I opened the door. "Samantha?" he asked, glancing at a photo. "My name is Samantha," I said, "but you're trespassing." He didn't flinch. He handed me a thick envelope. "I'm not here to take you back," he said. "I'm here to serve you." I took the envelope. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a document titled Medical Power of Attorney. It was dated 5 years ago. It had my signature on it. It granted my parents full legal authority to make medical decisions on my behalf in the event of my incapacity or unavailability. I stared at the signature. It looked like mine. The loops of the S, the sharp cross of the T. But I knew I had never signed it. I checked the date, August 14th, 5 years ago. I walked back into my office and pulled up my old calendar. August 14th. I was in London for a study abroad program. My passport stamps proved it. They had forged my signature. They had created a legal leash to drag me back into the operating room if I ever refused. This wasn't just pressure anymore. It was criminal fraud. I called a lawyer in Santa Fe. Her name was Elena. She specialized in family law and fraud. I showed her the document. I showed her my passport. "This is a felony," she said, her voice sharp. "They forged a legal document to gain control over your body. We can have them arrested." Alexander looked at the document, his surgeon's eyes scanning the medical clauses. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a small line of text. "They listed your blood type as O positive. You're A negative." He looked up at me. "They don't even know your blood type." They were so desperate to own you, they didn't even bother to learn the basic biology of the body they were trying to steal. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They didn't care about the medical reality. They just cared about the legal authority. They wanted to own the rights to my organs. I looked at Elena. "Do whatever it takes," I said. "File the charges. Get the restraining order. Burn it all down." The conflict had shifted. It was no longer about a daughter running away from home. It was about a woman fighting a criminal organization that happened to share her last name. 2 weeks later, Matthew stood on my doorstep. I saw him through the window, shielding his eyes from the desert sun. He looked thin, his skin sallow, but he was standing on his own. I opened the door. I did not invite him in. The desert heat wafted in around him. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I hired someone," he said, "with my own money." He paused, looking past me into the cool interior of the house. "I'm not here to ask for your liver. I'm here to tell you something you need to know." I let him in. He sat on the edge of the reclaimed wood sofa, looking out of place in his tailored Chicago clothes. "Mom and Dad," he started, his voice shaking. "They knew about the transplant list 3 years ago. The doctors told them to put me on it then. They refused." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because they wanted a family match," he said. "They told the doctors they had a perfect donor waiting in the wings. They said it would be cheaper. They said it would be safer. They gambled with my life because they didn't want to pay for the anti-rejection meds that come with a non-related donor, and they wanted to keep the savior narrative in the house. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. They had delayed his treatment, let his condition worsen, just to force my hand. They needed me to be the donor so they could own both of us. Him as the eternal patient, me as the eternal servant. Matthew looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I knew," he whispered. "I heard them talking about it a year ago, and I didn't say anything." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I was scared," he said. "I was scared that if you left, if you weren't the spare part anymore, they would turn on me. I was the golden child because you were the scapegoat. If you disappeared, I would have to be both. I watched them break you because I was terrified of being broken myself." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry. Not just for the kidney. I'm sorry for being a coward. I'm sorry I let them use you as a shield." The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of my childhood. It was the silence of truth. Matthew wasn't just the spoiled brother. He was a victim, too, manipulated into silence by the fear of losing the only love he had ever known, twisted as it was. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the terrified boy hiding behind the golden child mask. "I can't give you my liver," I said. "I know," he said. "I don't want it. I want my sister." We spent the rest of the afternoon at the kitchen table, not as siblings, but as co-conspirators. I showed him the forged power of attorney. He showed me emails where our parents had declined transplant list consultations. We built a strategy. I would not donate, but I would use my resources to get him listed immediately in a different state, away from their influence. Elena, my lawyer, expedited the process. Matthew was listed the next day. 3 weeks later, the call came. A donor match had been found in Arizona. Matthew flew out for the surgery. I flew out the next morning. I walked into the hospital, but I did not go to the waiting room. I knew my parents would be there, holding court, playing the worried martyrs. I went straight to the nurse's station. I had legal proxy. Now Matthew had signed the papers the day he left Santa Fe. I ensured security knew that David and Lisa were not allowed in the recovery room. When I walked out to the parking lot that evening, the desert sky was bruising purple. They were waiting by my rental car. My mother, Lisa, spotted me first. She rushed forward, arms open, tears already streaming. "Samantha, you came. You came to save him." She reached for me, expecting the old dynamic, expecting the load-bearing wall to take the weight. I stepped back. I pulled a manila envelope from my bag. "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the parking lot like a scalpel. "I did not come for you. I came for the brother you held hostage." I handed her the envelope. It contained the cease and desist order and a photocopy of the forged power of attorney with the date highlighted. "This is a promise," I said. "If you ever contact me or Matthew or try to interfere with his recovery again, I will hand the original copy of this forgery to the district attorney. You won't just lose your children. You will lose your freedom." My father started to bluster, his face reddening, but my mother grabbed his arm. She saw my eyes. She saw the architect who had finally built a wall they could not breach. They got into their car and drove away. I watched them go dust, kicking up against the sunset. I did not feel guilt. I felt the immense, beautiful weightlessness of a structure that finally stands on its own. I returned to Santa Fe, to Alexander, and to the life I had designed. I was whole. If this story resonated with you, please share it. You never know who needs to hear that they have permission to save themselves. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth and resilience.